Good afternoon, morning, and evening, ladies and gentlemen. Christopher Ludwig here. Welcome to the Livestream Hour. It's my pleasure to welcome you to our special focus today on aftermarket and service parts. We've got probably the hottest day of the year so far in London, even though we're under lockdown. So if things overheat here, you can be sure that it's not actually to do with the weather. It's because I'm genuinely so excited to be sharing the stage today with our panelists and focusing on this session, because it's really going to be quite exciting. So aftermarket and service parts is essential business. It's something that in almost most governments and states during the start of the COVID crisis deemed service parts and aftermarket essential, and so much of this business has continued to run even throughout the crisis period, and was amongst the first to, of course, adapt processes and protocols for health and safety, has had to manage through some periods of disruption, bottlenecks, and of course the very complex demand planning situation that we're seeing now. It's a sector that was already facing, if you like, disruption and change with the rise of electric vehicles, new mobility patterns, changes in the way that consumers use vehicles, and impacting on service parts. So clearly an interesting side of the sector, and also an area that I always like to point out. Logistics and supply chain is really used as a competitive advantage, a strategic advantage in many cases, in terms of delivery speed, in terms of order times, and visibility. So a lot of very interesting aspects to this, which is part of the reason why we wanted to bring you together in this panel, in the special live stream, to discuss that. So let's start, as we often do here, with a poll. I want to get your view on some of the aspects happening in the sector. So I'm going to launch the poll now, and the question is, besides lower demand, what is the top priority for aftermarket and service parts in the wake of the COVID-19 crisis? I think it's fair to say that demand is obviously a clear issue here, but besides the market economy, if you like, is it order backlogs due to supplier and factory closures, adapting facilities to new requirements, liquidity challenges across suppliers, retailers, workshops, logistics challenges, or is it in fact sort of resizing, reducing footprint and network to adjust to the challenges? So the vote is on there now. If you can, just let us know your thoughts on that, and we'll share it. It's always good to get your opinion. We'll leave that open for another minute or two. Not a minute or two, sorry, just another few seconds as that climbs. And we've got most of your votes in now, so I will go ahead and close the poll. And the results are pretty interesting. It's a pretty varied mix there. Obviously, very close between the order backlogs and adapting facilities. So in many ways, kind of dealing with the large many of the issues that we faced since the onset of this challenge, certainly in terms of dealing with health and safety, and obviously now that production has started back on, there's some issues there as well, I'm sure, for many to deal with. So interesting spread there, but clearly liquidity also seen as an issue. So thanks for your opinion there. Let's move into the sequence of our show today. I will just take you through very briefly a few slides. So yeah, welcome again. Thanks again to our partners for the Livestream Hour and our Festival of Transformation, CNW Courier Network, an important premium freight and expediter, and Fract Logistics Solutions, a key provider of IT visibility solutions for the finished vehicle sector. We have a really great panel of guests with you today. We're really covering all corners, if you like, of aftermarket and after sales. And I do realize that I need to distinguish a bit what we mean when we say that between the OE side and the distributor side. But we're very pleased. We'll have some time to interview and talk with some great representation from Toyota North America. Michael Shad, the General Manager in the parts distribution, accessory and development department with responsibility for fulfillment, and Ryan Grimm, who's also in the PDAD department, responsible for after sales supply. And indeed, they're both responsible for more than that, but that to give you some sense of what their role is here. We're also pleased, and we'll have some slides and insight from Frank Schlehuber, who is from CLEPA. That's the European Automotive Supplier Association, a key organization here in Europe, and speaking on behalf of a variety of tier 1 suppliers, and specifically with insight on the aftermarket and after sales side. And we're very pleased to have a special guest, Arndt Franz, who's the Chief Executive Officer of LKQ Europe, which has many brands here in Europe and indeed in North America, and is indeed the largest independent parts distributor in Europe, and has some very interesting perspective when it comes to this sector and indeed the role of supply chain. Quick rundown of the lineup. We'll do our traditional global roundup on some of the developments across the crisis right now, as we do each week, and I will give a little bit of context ahead of for the aftermarket and service parts side, and then we'll get quickly into our interviews and discussions, first with Toyota, then with CLEPA, and then we'll turn to LKQ. And we'll bring everyone together at the end for Q&A. However, throughout the show, please submit your questions, comments, thoughts. Tell us where you agree, disagree, and we'll do our best to address the questions to the panel. And indeed, if we can't during the show, you'll be sure to hear from us afterwards with further insight. So let's just do a quick global tour very quickly here, just giving you some snapshots of what's happening across the globe. China, I won't read everything out here. China continues to recover in terms of production rates going up, positive month of positive sales in April. In fact, there was even an interesting report this week out of Reuters about some easing of social distancing requirements in plants, which is a potentially interesting development. Other reports suggesting that May sales may be slowing, but probably a bit early to say just how linear that recovery will be, but ongoing movement past the crisis there, and interesting trends on the digital side, and some more incentives that are set to kind of come in different regions. We still see plenty of supplier risks, especially as we move further and out of the global supply chain, which could impact on the Chinese automotive industry, but nonetheless very robust and continuing to recover. Korea has been a standout in terms of the crisis and how it, of course, contained it. Has even seen pretty positive vehicle sales in the last few months. Production has been disrupted, but that's often been because of supply chain or demand reductions for exports, but nonetheless not necessarily shutting down a direct result of the crisis. And in Japan, the quick, changing situation. Still 8 prefectures with state of emergency orders. Many have been lifted. Could see a few more lifted. That's kept many of the plants shut, and of course reducing some reduction in demand there due to exports. And maybe we can get a bit more of a view of some of the Japan supply situation from our Toyota guests, but clearly it's been disrupted there as well. But nonetheless, hopefully moving towards the latter phase of that. Some domestic sales volumes drops throughout the month. Here in Europe, of course, we've got many different stages of recovery and risk ongoing, continuing plant openings as we've seen. You can see the ones that were planned for this week and a few more to come. Perhaps notable, we continue to see a bit of start-stop. Whether it's because reducing production because of demand or because of health and safety issues or supply issues. This sort of start-stop is not something we think will be quite common as it goes on. But nonetheless, dealerships are reopening in more countries and more regions, so that hopefully starts to get demand picture moving. It's a bit too early to say just what that recovery could look like. April was, of course, bad, almost 80% down. That wasn't a surprise. A lot of debate about when the incentive measures may come in, whether that's at a EU member state level or indeed at an EU level, as there's some reports that came out suggesting that would be possible today. So the situation somewhat improving, but nonetheless, of course, still very, very fluid and risky. In North America, this is a big week. It's restart week for Detroit, or let's say for the Detroit manufacturers, after quite a bit of delay and some issues there. So more plants coming online, a few more obviously still to come over the coming weeks. And as in Europe, everything's starting at quite reduced capacity and fairly low levels to get going. We've also starting to see the first signs of disruption again, as we saw in Europe. Mercedes-Benz had to close its plant in Atlanta because of Mexico part shortages. And just today, we've got reports that Volvo has idled the plant in South Carolina on part shortages. So plenty of risk there. Again, this is part of the new normal, so to say, at least for the foreseeable. Situation in Mexico, we talked a lot about that last week. Encourage you guys to go back and watch that panel again if you didn't. But bit of confusion. First, the government said May 18th, then they said June 1st. Now it's sooner if you can get the right approvals, and so more plants are moving towards opening, but it's still a little bit unclear what's happening when, but most are moving towards a restart, many this week, and more will come in the coming weeks ahead. So, but that sort of underlies some of the risks that we see, certainly out of Mexico. It plays such a key role in the North American supply chain and indeed beyond. But that's our global roundup. I don't want to spend too much time on production and supply on those issues, because in fact our order of the day today is around the service parts, after sales and aftermarket business. And the challenges would be not unfamiliar to the production side, but clearly, as I alluded to in the beginning, it's been managing through the crisis right from the start. You've already voted some of those issues like backlogs to be quite significant challenge. There's obviously liquidity risk, complex inventory management, and perhaps a acceleration in other trends like online service channels, etc. And then the big, of course, question is managing inventory and demand planning with so much uncertainty, with so much disruption. And that sort of leads me in, I think, well, to kick off our discussions with our very distinguished guests. So with that, I would like to bring on our first guests of the show. So Ryan Grimm and Michael Schad, who are joining us from Plano, Texas. Well connected. Ryan, Michael, very good to see you.
Hi, how are you?
Very well, and thank you for joining us on the show today. So Ryan, Michael, can we just maybe start with a little bit of a status update on on Toyota's service parts and after sales network and operations in North America? Maybe we could start at the sort of broad demand level, since we would have gone through a few stages of the cycle already. How much of a hit did it take? Where is it right now, and where do you sort of see it developing?
Yeah, first of all, thanks, Christopher, for having us on the automotive logistics panel. We appreciate the opportunity. So as you said, my name is Ryan Grimm. I'm responsible for parts supply chain operations on the supply side. So, in terms of your question regarding the demand, really, March was down a little bit, but frankly, as everyone knows, the coronavirus really took hold in the March timeframe. We started seeing some drops in sales the last couple weeks in March, or drops in demand, I should say. We really bottomed out in April. That's where we were in the 50% range down. By far the worst weeks were the week of April 20th and April 27th. But since that point, we've seen a steady increase in demand in the roughly 5 to 10% range on a weekly basis. And matter of fact, this week, we kind of hit a milestone. We were a little bit north of 80% of our what we call pre-COVID demand. So it has kind of steadily been climbing up. I wouldn't call it necessarily a perfect V shape, but the return has been going in the right direction, definitely, for the last several weeks.
Well, that's certainly encouraging, and a faster demand recovery might be the wrong word, but let's call it, positive trend than we maybe see on the new vehicle side right now. So if you were to kind of turn to your network in terms of your dealer retailer side, I mean, is that largely back up and running? How much of that did or didn't shut during that, from the service parts point of view?
From the service parts point of view, I think the bottom point was actually only about 5% of the service areas, parts and service parts of the dealerships that closed. So, obviously not a large number, but as Ryan said, the demand still dropped by half. So despite the fact that very few dealers closed on the service and parts side, there was obviously a huge demand hit. But to put it a little more perspective, the showrooms for the dealers, that was about 40% closure. So that was obviously far more impacted than the parts and service, but still the demand hit was significant for us.
And from your from your network, from your operational network, and point of view of your parts centers, distribution centers, warehouse, again, were those at any point shut as we would have seen on the plant side, or was it more a matter of reducing down the capacity and the output in that period?
It was more about reducing the capacity and output to ride the lower demand trend. We were very, very fortunate. A lot of hard work went into the safety in our buildings and the messaging to our team members. I could talk about that quite a bit. That was a tremendous amount of activity and became a priority. I mean, safety is always our top priority at Toyota, but we had to pivot quickly to the evolution of CDC guidelines, but then also how we wanted to approach setting new criterias and really management structure to ensure that we're exceeding whatever the CDC guidelines were coming up with and making sure our environments were as safe as possible for our team members, but also, of course, to avoid shutdowns due to any type of outbreak activity. So, something Brian and I are very proud about is that we never had one of our warehouses shut down. And I think that is a testament to all of our facility managers and team members and frontline supervisors that are out there in the network.
And I think we'll come back to some of the things that were done on that side, but kind of closing out, if you like, rounding out the view of the network as such on the supplier and kind of inbound side. So obviously, we all know factories around the world and the network, shut. Did that cause a lot of backlog in your aftermarket and service part supply chain? And what's the sort of status today? Do you see that kind of ramping back up in good pace, or are there some risks that you'll sort of see some backlog come in the coming weeks, if you like?
Yeah, it did initially. So maybe you're aware, we on the Toyota side, we shut down our production the week of March 23rd. And as soon as we shut down our production, the initial reaction from many of our suppliers were to also shut down with the manufacturing shutdowns. In addition, there were a lot of new CDC guidelines coming out. There were also a lot of local mandates coming out at the same time. So, what we really kind of focused on with the suppliers was going back to the guidelines and confirming again that service, parts, and operations were deemed essential. And so we're really, what we did those first couple weeks when we were experiencing the higher backlogs is we actually started meeting with a lot of the suppliers, making sure they had the correct legal interpretation of the mandates. Many of those suppliers reopened. Some of them reopened on much smaller scales. For example, running service parts, 1 day a week, and then we would have fewer pickups. We had to make a lot of adjustments. I'm happy to say, kind of through the crisis, even though we had an initial backlog or what we call back orders increase, through the crisis, we were actually able to improve our overall back order situation. So we didn't get to 100% closed on all our back orders, but we actually made some progress by partnering with suppliers, making adjustments on pickup schedules, et cetera, to support them. So it worked out well from that perspective.
Okay, well, yeah, that's a surprise. You actually improved that situation during the period, perhaps in part because of the not all the great reasons. Obviously, partly demand was down in that period, but nonetheless, putting you in a better position, I'm sure, to respond, to demand as it hopefully continues to recover. And on the kind of logistics side, I mean, clearly, as I mentioned at the outset, service parts, pushes through a lot of fast-paced logistics, overnight and express deliveries, dedicated dealer, not least also on the global side as well of your supply chain. So, are you dealing with capacity or delays and disruption on the logistics side, and how have you been managing through that?
Yeah, it's a good question, and we're worried about that quite a bit, but to be honest with you, not so much. not so much of an impact. And there in the market, there were a lot of dynamics playing out. Obviously, a lot of the logistics providers were moving to more of the essential businesses, such as moving food and groceries across the market, et cetera. But to be honest with you, a big portion of our logistics providers had a lot of capacity. So we were able to actually access that. So we really didn't see any disruptions on the logistics side. Now we did see cost issues, especially for air freight. Many know that from Europe and from Asia, including Japan, those rates doubled. So air freight became a problem from a cost perspective. But in terms of the actual logistics to move the parts, we really didn't see many issues on that front.
Okay, so in many ways, there's some positive messages here on some of that stability. I'm sure not through all of it, through quite a lot of hard work and adjustment. If I turn to the part centers and distribution centers again, in terms of the adjustments that you've made, in terms of the kind of CDC guidelines that we're all coming to be, more familiar with, social distancing, PPE, all the disinfection kind of processes. How much of adjustment, how quickly do you have to do that? How has that changed, if you like, the pace and nature of your warehouse and distribution operations?
The change was substantial, and the pace was extraordinary. And it was an evolution. I think, as I'm sure everyone that's in the supply chain world and distribution that's on this call, we're making adjustments along the way because of, in the United States at least, you had different states issuing different kind of mandates, and then you had the CDC guidelines. So we sought out right away. We created an aggressive criteria with social distancing that went above the CDC guidelines initially to try and stay ahead of any changes. We, over time, but in a very short period of time, in about 2 weeks, we created what we called a playbook, which had all of our new standards and guidelines to support the safest environment possible within our part centers and PDCs. Now, the playbook is about 100 slides. It's a lot. It goes into social distancing is a huge component of it. Our sanitation efforts, we had to partner with janitorial companies and increase our cleaning of our warehouses. Also the cleaning, as the operation was going on high touch areas, temperature taking, a variety of different countermeasures that we put in place. And we implemented that right away and created an audit process where each facility had to do specific audits on the playbook and then a separate one on social distancing. And that really gets into more of our Toyota culture. I mean, what we needed to do was set a new necessary condition and a clear judgment criteria so that everybody could grasp what's a good condition versus a bad condition relative to this new environment. And then we measured that right away and incorporated those new measurements as if it was a new KPI in our daily performance boards and report outs. So it was a tremendous effort, but I do genuinely believe that we acted very, very quickly. There were a lot of long nights, both Ryan and I, but all those facility managers and team members as well. And it's a matter of priority. Obviously, when this happened, there were some things that were on our annual plan that we deprioritized to make sure that this was very clearly the top priority, and because of that, we were able to execute very quickly.
Yeah, that's all very interesting, and in terms of how this impacts on your ability to hit the kinds of, you mentioned making some adjustments clearly, but in general, would you say that the hit to efficiency and productivity is significant, and that's something that will kind of live within this reality for a time being, or in fact, have you been able to, kind of manage through that in a way that as you get back up to higher demand, won't affect you as much?
Yeah, it's a good question. There are a lot of variables at play. So first of all, our efficiency has gone down a bit. Not, we're talking in the 5-6% level. But there's variables at play beyond just the social distancing component. Ryan mentioned that our volumes dropped by 50%. We have contingent workers that come in, and that's part of our our team member strategy, so that we can flex up and down with demand changes. So we over time we required less people, so that changed the dynamic in the warehouse. So some of the functions where you may have normally been working, well, now we needed you to work in another area that you haven't been working in maybe a year. So some fast retraining, making sure that the process was followed. But there's going to be a normal curve where it takes people some time to get up to that top efficiency level. So we had that dynamic. We had the instability of those demand changes that affected our efficiency in various ways. So it's difficult to discern at this point a specific how much has, say, social distancing impacted our efficiency. We're going to get to that. I mean, we will have to re-time study our areas, all of our processes, to really grasp, okay, what is the new normal of these processes, and then Kaizen from there. I think part of the challenge point, though, is how much time should we invest in that, given that we're already seeing our demand coming back. So there is kind of a wait and see approach with not overreacting to the efficiency, which again has been relatively minor.
Okay, yeah, and maybe Ryan, if you were to kind of look at that also on the kind of inventory side and inventory management side. Now, clearly Toyota, again, famous for lean, for all those great principles which come into TPS. How's that being affected right now? How do you anticipate it needs to in the next stages of the crisis while we're still in such a period of uncertainty?
Yeah, inventory management has been a huge focus, and to be honest with you, our inventory levels are at a higher level at this point, a little bit, not by design though. It was mainly because we had to make a lot of quick adjustments based on the demand. Like we talked about the 50% drop, we actually cut our orders in the 60% range in order to manage the inventory. But as you know, we can't obviously cut off our import pipelines from, say, Japan or even Europe that quickly. So we did end up in a bit of an inventory increase situation. Now our biggest focus is making sure the inventory is in the right place at the right time based on the returning demand. So for example, we got to get it to the facing PDCs quicker. And so a big focus again is, okay, we understand our inventory situation. Now, how do we distribute that inventory appropriately to be in the right place at the right time? So that's the main focus for us.
That's great. So maybe before we move into the next stage and can bring you back on for the panel discussion, maybe one last point that I thought we can address together here. You both are part of a department that I believe the last year around this time or a little earlier, came together more with the inbound and production parts, a bit more integration across Toyota. Has this sort of, whether it's that initiative or others, played a role in this period, or in terms of the Toyota way in that case, or other areas that you'd point to?
Yeah, I guess I can start it off, and Ryan's going to have a good perspective on this too. I think it was so important for us. We were able to leverage that, what we call One Toyota, and really what it is it's the manufacturing and the service side coming together so that we're one logistics organization, but it opened access to the entire company, which gave us a lot of really good information. And there's two specific areas. I'm going to let Ryan talk about the supplier side, but the area that I wanted to touch on was drafting from the plants as they were identifying opportunities and developing policies, because as Ryan mentioned, they were shut down. So frankly, they had a lot of time to think about what this new normal would be like. In our situation, we were reacting on the fly very, very quickly, and we were making some really good changes, but it was crucial for us to stay in tune with what countermeasures and philosophies the plant side was going to be implementing, and taking those things and incorporating those into our playbook because we saw them as best practices. Another component of that is, we have plants in our part centers that work close together. So the fact that we kind of have one playbook overall is a positive, consistent thing when it comes to messaging to our team members. So the bottom line is I saw a tremendous amount of learning that ultimately allowed us to move faster and to get it right the first or second time, as opposed to having to reiterate over and over again based on the changing conditions. So, ultimately, efficiency and strong identification of best practices was huge, and I credit One Toyota to that.
Yeah, I'll add to that. The direction by Jim Lentz back in 2016 to bring us together as One Toyota, that was a plan for the next 50 years. To be honest with you, the importance of that 4 years later with this crisis have been tremendous. And to Michael's point, drafting off of the manufacturing on both sides, as I think about it from the supply side, we've always been, we feel like the benchmark in terms of the level of service and how we partner with our dealerships as it relates to service. But what this One Toyota did is it allowed us to basically connect the entire supply chain all the way back to the relationship with the suppliers, and manufacturing has a very close relationship with those suppliers because of the volume they're getting, and then obviously the service out of those suppliers, all the way up to our dealerships. And being able to connect that entire supply chain through this One Toyota activity has paid enormous dividends for us. That to me is by far the greatest benefit of us being together during this crisis.
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic. Well, listen, the good news is that you're not leaving just yet. In terms, we'll have you back on a little bit later when we bring our panel back together. But thanks very much for giving us that overview and insight into what's happening. I think it's some great information for our audience to take away from, and also a bit of optimism there, not least on the demand side, but also in how the company has been managing through this. Some key lessons learned there. And yeah, so thanks again to you both, and I will bring you back to our virtual stage after we hear from Frank and Arndt.
Okay, thank you.
Very good, thank you.
So our next guest, well, I don't want to say I'm glad that you all talked about the supplier side and back issues as being the top challenge, but it is relevant that you did, and that I can now bring on our next guest, who is Frank Schlehuber from Klepper. So hi, Frank, there you are. Good to see you, Frank.
Yeah, hello. Thanks for having me here.
It's a pleasure.
Today in the automotive logistics panel. Thanks for considering also the supplier's view in that session here, and I'm glad to share with you some insights on what's going on our end here in Europe.
Fantastic. So I'm going to bring up the presentation and take it away. Let you give some insights, and we'll come back to you in a bit.
Okay, let's start with what's Klepper about. Klepper is the European voice of automotive suppliers. Primarily, we are working in Brussels with politics on new legislation and what is relevant for our automotive business in total. We have about 120 members, and we reach out to another 3,000 members by our national associations, and this means we cover in Europe, out of the 27 states alone, 21. At the moment, we are in hot discussions with politics on how to get out of the crisis, and all the hot topics we saw before didn't disappear. We still need to consider that the automotive industry is running three major trends at the moment. On one side, we are working on autonomous cars. We are working on new powertrains. We try to decarb the world. And we are working on connectivity solutions. All three very expensive. All three have the potential to create at the end disruption. This means these three major effects are relevant for the automotive industry. When we look to aftermarket, we have other drivers which are relevant for the business. On one side, we change the vehicle technology, and to my perception, the connectivity is the one which has the biggest impact at the moment to change models in the aftermarket. Also, the software gets more and more important for doing service to cars. Electric vehicles is a little bit an issue. We see the impact on the aftermarket definitely in the years to come, and this is 3-4 years out. The question is now what politics does regarding the stimulus packages on the demand side. Is it focusing only on electric? Will this accelerate the electric vehicle penetration? This is a little bit a question mark, but this will move this button maybe a little bit more to the left or a little bit more to the right. We have vehicle ownership models which change substantially, more fleet business, and this means less people will decide on aftermarket issues in the future because these fleet managers will highly professionalized take decisions and probably work with a different method and also with different attitude in our industry. And then last but not least, we have tremendous changes in the distribution channel, and probably COVID-19 is something what will accelerate this trend regarding consolidation. And consolidation probably not only on the wholesale level, but also on the level of suppliers. When we look to the impact of the supplier industry, how are we affected at the moment? I mentioned before these tremendous changes. We were already in a phase of transition, and now we were really hit by surprise by this COVID impact. And we measure on a regular basis the sentiment of our members, and we do this, and the last one was just 2 weeks ago, and we recognized that especially in the month of April, the economic outlook was worsening, and most of the suppliers see here in Europe definitely a decrease, and it's around the 20% expected by about 90% of all our members, and more than 50% are expecting also negative forecasts. So this is a very negative outlook. I would say this is the one which was captured at the peak of the impact, and after an April where we really saw demands in some countries in Europe at -90 or -80%. What we do at the moment is we restart plants. We have now the task to go for ramp-up phases and to fill the pipeline again, but still there is insecurity regarding the demand side, and the high volatility is the biggest challenge what we face on the supplier side at the moment. And also another issue is that in Europe especially, we have the issue that the crisis is in different stages in the different markets, and this means we are interconnected with our supply chain. This means it doesn't help if in one member state there are already new legislation regarding opening of operations, and in another country it's not following. So that's something what we face at the moment. And the question regarding how long will it take to overcome the crisis, I think here we are very clear that it will take definitely longer than 12 months, if not by end of 2021. So that's roughly. What can aftermarket do to smoothen that a little bit? Here we have definitely not a -20%. We see aftermarket can stabilize a little bit the production volumes and can reduce the volatility, and that's following a little bit a different path regarding the overall business compared to OE. When we look what are our preparations for the ramp up on the next slide, we see definitely, and we asked 2 weeks ago our members, what are you doing? Do you feel prepared for the ramp up? And I think we have no issues on the health and safety measures and planning of the start of production. We will see and a little bit later that there will be considerations regarding what is really the impact on the ecosystem automotive in Europe. Will there be new purchasing decisions in the future, new sourcing decisions in the future? I think this is something what is now the big question. What are the long-term effects of this COVID crisis? Will the production footprint really change? And there are some voices which go in direction to we will see more regionalization. And if you really paint this big picture very large, then you will recognize that the largest production and the highest volumes are definitely in Asia, and would as a consequence mean that more production is going into Asia. So what has a negative employment impact on Europe? So that's what we are working on at the moment. And of course, our members are doing a lot of preparations to make sure that at least parts, especially for the aftermarket, are available. HSE topics, personal protection equipment, I think that's widely supported by all companies, but also we see a lot of new working models to be established. Assembly lines get new organized. We see more social distancing in the plants, and from that side, all preparations are done, and I have not seen a warehouse being shut down for aftermarket purpose. So from that side, the industry supported heavily to keep at least aftermarket going. On the OE side, we definitely followed what OEMs did as a major measure, and here we had to deal with shutdowns as well. What are suppliers doing? And this is a very good example of what engineers can do. And just this morning introduced an initiative which we had in the Netherlands, where automotive engineers started to design face shields, and I saw a lot of our members now producing their own face masks for own production purpose, but also for third parties. We see automotive suppliers in France and also in Italy working on respirators, ventilators, and there's a lot of activity ongoing where simply automotive engineering competence is used to make things happen which we didn't expect 6 weeks ago. And from that side, the suppliers have a very, very high interest to get this supply chain back to normal. And from that side, we support wherever possible. But there is another aspect. We feel, and this was the driving force behind our code of conduct, which we released at the beginning of the crisis. We feel that it's definitely essential that we think about how do we deal with each other. We need a very close collaboration among all parties. We need to inform each other timely about delays, about available. I think we need a completely new form and level of transparency to work together on a restart of this industry and to get it back to normal. From that side, we developed this code of conduct together with the OEMs, with the manufacturers, and it's on our website available, and it shall guide our industry how to deal with others and how to avoid unnecessary further delays and cost. From that side, this was a short update on what's going on the supplier side. I'm looking forward to the discussion later on.
Thank you very much, Frank. Some really key points there, and great to kind of get the updates and what the suppliers are doing. I think it was also a good reminder of what the suppliers have done on the front lines as well, as you alluded to there. That's something that perhaps you know, I didn't mention because we've talked about it a lot, but it is really notable, that side. So thank you for that. And we'll come back to Frank and on the CLEPA and supplier side when we bring our panel back together. But now I'm very happy to get the chance to sort of, if you like, round out the view a bit on the aftermarket side and bring on our next guest, Arnd Frans, the CIO of LKQ Europe. And many of you in the audience may know or may not know. You certainly have known the brands, probably, if you don't realize that you know this is a company with 5 billion in turnover, many brands in the aftermarket, and a large workforce, which we'll hear more about from Frans. So Frans, thanks again for joining us and sharing some of your perspective and insights with ours. I thought we might also start again, kind of as we did with our guest from Toyota. Can you give us a bit of a status update on the market in terms of what you're seeing on the demand side, perhaps, to start with, and then we can talk a little bit about the operations from LKQ.
Yeah, sure, Christopher. It's great being with you and with this panel. So for us at LKQ, as being the largest independent aftermarket distributor in Europe, of course, the COVID crisis has been extremely challenging. And it has been challenging at a time when we, like many others, like Frank Schlehover said, for the suppliers also, we have been focusing on something completely different before the crisis arrived, because after acquiring around 70 companies in 8 years across Europe, we were fully focused on the integration of this company, and then suddenly this virus arrives. And the first thing that we did when it was apparent that China would be affected, we looked at our supply chain, so to understand what is our exposure to what's happening in China. And one thing that we had never done before is looking at the multi-tier structure of our sourcing, and then suddenly we were understanding how dependent the world economy is on China. With a world steel production share of around 50%, aluminum in the 40% range. And eventually we found out it didn't make a difference between our tier 1 automotive OE supplier that we're selling to the independent aftermarket, their fantastic products, or we were looking at pure aftermarket suppliers. The level of exposure of that supply chain to China was pretty similar, surprisingly enough. Around 1/3 of that supply chain in both channels is dependent on the largest economy of the future. And therefore, of course, we took, on the one hand, a lot of actions to make sure we were covered regarding protecting the availability of products for our customers. But also, of course, this then initiates a whole different discussion about whether we should regionalize the supply chain, whether we should strengthen certain sourcing strategies rather than others. But in the end, it just pointed out the world is one economy, and you cannot separate those things, at least not over the foreseeable future. And therefore, transparency is everything, working with our suppliers, working with our service providers. And therefore, that has been a big learning before we actually then hit, like everyone else, the second half of March, the beginning of April, with the deepest trough that we had ever been imagining. And since then, slowly but surely, things are getting better, but I would not say they are recovering. I'm all with Frank. This will take a while until we get back to whatever is going to be the new normal.
Okay, yeah. So, well, I mean, so thank you for the insight on the supply side there. Clearly, with a company that sources so many different parts from I'm sure around the world, you've really seen the impacts moving right through every chain of that. So, in terms of the operational impact, how much of your distributor network is back up or is opening again or starting to open? I mean, roughly speaking, from how much was shut. I mean, there on the kind of retail side and direct that side, and then also similarly with your supply chain and your kind of network, has that was similar to Toyota? Did it never really shut and now it's sort of going back up? Maybe you can give us some perspective there too.
Yeah, of course, we were highly concerned, and from what I explained earlier, we immediately reacted after understanding the risk that we were going to, because one thing that we need to make sure as an independent aftermarket distributor is the availability of our products. So customer service is our biggest promise, and availability of our products is our biggest promise. So we lifted all the safety stock levels to make sure we had sufficient safety stock across Europe. We were also concerned about a potential lockdown in any of our central distribution centers, so we moved a lot of inventory downstream into our 1,100 branches across the European landscape. And certainly we did pay immediate attention to the safety of our employees and our customers and our supply partners by immediately starting to implement the necessary precautions, whether it's social distancing, even face masks for every externally facing function, but also for the people that were working in critical distance from each other. So those have been the measures. And from today's viewpoint, I can say we have so far been able to fulfill that promise to our customer that I also made in a video statement that went to all our customers online. We've been able to fulfill that promise and keep the service levels for all our customers, even in the end of March and beginning of April, stable. We had to reduce the opening times. We had also to shut down some of our branches, especially in areas where we have a very high branch density. So where we have within one city 3 or even 4 branches. Then, of course, with a lot lower sales, it doesn't make sense to keep all that capacity open. So we certainly paid a lot of attention to capacity adjustments, not only in our central distribution centers, but also across the branches and in the offices.
Now, one thing I think for a company like LKQ, the supply chain, the logistics side of this is really important, isn't it? I mean, you have very heavy, very frequent deliveries across your network. Have you felt impacts on that side, and has that had to reduce down in terms of the service levels, and is that something you're looking to ramp back up?
Yeah, the service levels are different from each European market. So one extreme is, for example, the UK, where we have lead times under 1 hour after an order arrives at one of our branches for the product to reach the customer. And other countries are different, but everywhere where we have sales channels directly to the workshops, we reach out to them multiple times a day. Obviously, you can't keep up those frequent shipments if the delivery vans are almost empty. So certainly we were reducing some of these tours, but we still made sure that there is daily shipments to all our customers in the 21 countries that we serve, and in many cases multiple shipments a day. But of course, different countries were affected in a different way. The countries with heavy lockdown, like Italy, like France, like Spain, went dramatically down in sales, up to 80%. And on the other hand, we had some countries like Sweden, like Germany, that were less affected. But in the end, it has been a remarkable experience, I think, for everyone involved, not only in the automotive industry, but especially with the governments trying out different ways to fight the virus, but also now trying different ways to bring back the economies.
Of course, LKQ has acquired many companies over the past decade or so. Do you, in this environment, anticipate, maybe not now, but in the kind of next further stages, sort of, as Frank alluded to earlier, further consolidation on the wholesaler side and in the value chain? And are there potentially opportunities for a company like yours?
Yeah, the independent aftermarket distribution in Europe is extremely fragmented. So whether you take it by sales or you take it by number of employees, even LKQ with annual sales of 5.2 billion euros last year still has a single-digit percentage of market share. And this is just a signal of there's a lot of things that still may even be necessary in the future in order to make this market fit for what's coming. We believe some of the substantial investments that are necessary for the aftermarket of the future and also the automotive market as a whole in the future can only be taken if you have necessary size. And certainly the current crisis will be accelerating that trend and many other trends among them, because we're seeing a unprecedented shift in consumer behavior, in driver and car owner behavior. And we believe there have to be players in the market that really are not waiting for what's going to happen, but they take the initiatives, and we believe we should be among those players.
And of course, this competition is not just with between independents, but obviously on the OE side as well. Do you again see there maybe opportunities to gain market share in other areas of the market?
Yeah, of course, this market, like many others, is competitive because everyone is competing for availability of product, for range and coverage, for levels of service and training and loyalty and relationship to the customers. But in the end, some of the things that will be happening in the future will also require a shift of behavior models on the side of the supply side, including the distributors, including the OEMs, including the tier 1 parts manufacturers. So I believe the upcoming era may even be an era of greater collaboration between the traditional players and even the future players.
Great. Well, before I bring our other panelists back to have some discussion amongst all, maybe a last point, again, looking specifically at LKQ, having acquired as many companies as you had, having the sort of footprint that you have, I understand that there has been integration underway, and that in particularly has also focused on the supply chain and logistics. And I thought maybe can you share a little bit with us about what the strategy is in terms of integrating more of the logistics side in terms of how you run your network, and whether again the current crisis changes that, accelerates that, how it might impact that.
Yeah, we're running an integration program. So at the moment and for the foreseeable future, we have shifted gears from acquisition to integration, because we believe that comes along with a lot of synergies that are benefiting our customers, are benefiting our supply partners, but are also benefiting our shareholders. And therefore, that is a clear focus at the moment. Of course, the crisis has forced us to certainly shift that focus for a little while on the day-to-day management of our capacity and resources, and really focus on our customers to make sure that even in the most difficult of all times, we keep that focus on our customers, whether they're workshops, whether they are resellers, or they're online customers. And therefore, we hope to be back in that integration mode as the recovery is proceeding. On the logistics side, certainly there's a lot of opportunities. You can imagine 70 companies with each one of their supply chains, logistical setups, central distribution centers, regional distribution centers. So some of the big things that are happening are all dedicated to complexity reduction, reduction of multiple brands, the famous 60 brands that we had in brake pads. That's not creating any value for our customers, and certainly not creating any value for our suppliers to produce in small lot sizes. So that's just an example of what we do in the category management, and the logistics infrastructure will follow along. So at the moment, we're consolidating 5 regional warehouses in the Netherlands into one big central distribution center that will go online in the next year. We hope to be done with the construction this year, and then the fit out is in 2021.
That's fantastic. What I'd like to do now is actually, invite our other panelists to join us now, because I think there's a number of other topics that we've hit upon across all, which are worth some, kind of collective sharing, if you like. So welcome back, Frank. Welcome back, Ryan, and welcome back, Michael. One point that I thought maybe we can start on. It was alluded to perhaps a few times, but we're certainly seeing COVID as an accelerator of digitalization in many areas, not least digital conferences and events and sessions, as we're doing right now. But in terms of the aftermarket and service parts, maybe I'll start with you on directly, and then we can hear from Toyota. Are you seeing rises or changes already in that, in the potential for online ordering, and do you see further scope for that during and in the aftermath of this crisis?
Yeah, there has been a number of press releases by various players, and also for LKQ, there has been quite a shift in the way customers were ordering during, for example, the month of April. So for some of our online channels, we saw the sales doubling and tripling during the past weeks, whereas the traditional way of ordering, which is still digital in many cases, and also the telephone orders went down quite substantially. So I believe people have understood, although we ship most of our orders to the customer destination, people have understood that there is other ways of ordering product, and that will certainly be something very interesting to follow on through the next months, what's going to happen. But one thing is clear: digital ways of communication, digital ways of ordering, digital ways of running business processes will be one of the things that will be experiencing substantial acceleration after the crisis.
Ryan or Michael, I'm still here, by the way. I'm just giving you guys more of the screen time. I know obviously most of you, the service parts side would come through dealers, but as we've seen on vehicle side of the business, there has been some necessity to shift online, at least where things were shut. Is this impacting on the business for Toyota so far as you can see?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, very similar. I think we saw an uptick in online activity, and it's speculative, but I think we're all waiting to see whether this is a permanent kind of consumer behavioral change. I think that's the way society is going. So we've been preparing for that, but we've definitely seen an increase during the COVID crisis, and we're anticipating and being prepared for that to be permanent. So we're seeing the same things that Arnd is.
Great, and if we look kind of on the technology side within your operation, so for example in your warehouse distribution centers, and maybe I'll start again with Toyota here. I don't know that the part centers have necessarily been the most automated part of Toyota operations, but do you see more room for automation, perhaps even in the context of the new guidelines that we're working with? Is that something that is already coming into place, or you see changing over time?
So I'll answer that with two elements. One is specific to automation. Frankly, I don't think that COVID is. We were already going down that path, studying automation opportunities within our warehouses. Aside from the COVID crisis, and I anticipate that that's going to continue and maybe even expedite. But on more of the cultural side for Toyota, and one of the key fundamentals of Toyota production system is Genchi Genbutsu, which is going out to the shop floor and seeing the actual condition and any problems that exist. So for me personally, this has been a big challenge, because I'm very fortunate and very proud of my facility managers and team members out in the field. But it's been very difficult for me because I'm not able to travel out and actually be on the shop floor to see it. So we're leveraging FaceTime. I talked before about our playbook and all the countermeasure activities that we're doing for social distancing and everything else. So, you know, I have meetings set up with my safety coordinators and facility managers for them to literally virtually take me on the shop floor and simply do FaceTime so that I can see and I can ask questions and we can have dialogue, not just for me to better understand what's going on, but also to show the team that this is an incredible priority for us, so much so that I need to see it. And I think that that's important and impactful, that we don't lose our way with our cultural elements, that we find ways to still, you know, do the necessary things like Genchi and Butsu.
Thanks for that, Michael. Maybe on from your side, from LKQ, in terms of automation in your facilities, and then Frank, maybe we can touch on that from a supplier side. Obviously, it's a general point, perhaps more broadly across the industry, but maybe it'd be interesting to hear what you feel from the supplier side as well. But Arnd, first on the on your facilities.
Yeah, first of all, I would just like to compliment Toyota. Some of the things I have seen in my life from Toyota, both in terms of employee safety, but also in terms of efficiency, continuous improvement. It's just fantastic what you guys are doing, and I think it's a hallmark for everyone to try their best to be as good as Toyota one day in the far future. But certainly we are looking at automation too. We have looked at automation. The main driver is just precision and execution. And certainly to find out how we can offset some of the inflationary pressures that we have, of course, from the labor side, but also from other cost factors. And then sustainability, reduction of our CO2 footprint is a huge thing. May not be the first thing that comes to our mind for a distributor, but we believe we have a big leverage, and if we work well with our supply partners and our customers, we can make a big change. So the COVID crisis cannot do a lot of difference in the short term, but for sure it dramatically impacts our longer term agenda.
Thanks for that. Frank, did you want to weigh in on the points we make about automation and technology? We have a bit of a delay. Okay, I think we have a delay on Frank's side there. Apologies, or apologies. Are you muted there, Frank? Apologies. Was sometimes we face that. Okay, we're having. Sorry, Frank. We've got a bit of a audio problem there, so we'll see if you can reconnect on the audio. And just whilst you're doing that, let me go. I had a couple of questions in from the audience, and I thought let me turn to questions specifically addressed to Ryan, and obviously I think it'll have impacts for others as well. So the question is regarding inventory and distribution. How is Toyota leveraging supply chain visibility and data, particularly for inventory and transport?
Yeah, we heavily leveraging all the data we can actually get our hands on, and looking at it. Matter of fact, we have multiple checkpoints a day to evaluate our inventory positions. The other thing that just to kind of add to sort of our normal practice and how we're adjusting, especially on that point, you know, our typical cadence was to really evaluate kind of our inventories on a monthly basis, and take a bit of a sorry, I'm getting to some noise. So take a little bit of a longer term view of that. During this COVID crisis, we've actually gone to a cadence of evaluating that data and those metrics on a weekly basis. And then so we're actually making our inventory adjustments on a weekly basis, which is adjusting our orders more frequently to our suppliers, as well as how we're moving the inventory around to our different facing PDCs. In addition, even when we look at it on a weekly basis, we're also evaluating sometimes on a daily basis, especially for high runner type parts like maintenance parts and hardware type parts. So we have a very extreme focus on that. We're leveraging that data, like I said, pretty much on a daily basis for many parts.
Arne, does that echo some of the focus for data and visibility for your company, or was that working a different way?
Yeah, of course, like most companies, we have dramatically increased the frequency of our meetings and data reviews on the supply chain side. So every business is meeting daily on a European level. We're meeting weekly with a full-blown review of supplier exposure. We have certainly completely intensified the communication with our suppliers, also increased the visibility of what's going on downstream. But in the end, we will have a lot of inefficiency in the process. I mentioned at the beginning that we pushed inventory downstream to be protected from any lockdown on our central distributions. So now a lot of the inventory is it's existing, but it's in the wrong place, and therefore that certainly is one of the biggest challenge that we have to really make the right decision. Do we want to take the additional cost and bring it back, or do we want to reorder? So from the current forecast, we look like we will be back in normal days in inventory, depending on market, depending on entity, between July and September this year. So it's a big challenge to handle this supply chain whip at the moment, or bullwhip in the supply chain. So at the moment we are bringing down the orders to the suppliers, but I told everyone, hey, wait until the beginning of the third quarter. We need you back in the game, and this will be coming full blown. And to depending on what the fourth quarter forecast will look like at that time, we may be need to be back on normal inventory levels by the year end. So this will be a terrible year for the supply chain.
That might be the headline we have to lead with. A terrible year for the supply chain, to say the least. Frank, let's see again. Hopefully the connection is improved there. Unfortunately, I don't think it has.
Works now.
I think it's
Can you hear me now?
with some delay. So let's see if we can make it work. If not, then unfortunately we might have to.
Then probably I dial in with phone.
Okay, yeah, perhaps because yes, unfortunately a bit of a delay there. I do apologize.
Give it a try.
Yeah. So on the one of the questions that's been coming in is on liquidity risks in the supply chain, and I wondered if we might just touch on that in the next bit from the panel. Maybe we can start with you, Arne, in terms of where you're seeing. Are you seeing risks? I mean, I've seen some reports of liquidity, of insolvencies kind of increasing daily and stuff, but a bit anecdotal right now. I wonder if you can give us some perspective on that, and then maybe we can hear from Toda as well if we can't get Frank's connection.
Yeah, of course. You know, it's all over the place because everyone is struggling with securing cash flow and securing liquidity, and I think every company would make a big mistake not focusing on cash flow and liquidity at the moment. So of course we're closely monitoring that on our customer side. The independent aftermarket is not protected from lack of liquidity, to say the least, and therefore we have from the first day of the crisis asked everyone in our organization to stay as close to our customers. Number one, to make sure they're safe. Number two, to make sure they get the product on time. But number three, to understand what we can do to help our customers protect their liquidity. And so, for example, in Germany, after we've seen in the initial phase of the crisis, there was some remaining coverage that the banks needed to take over 10 or 20%, depending on the size of the company, that would remain as a risk in their portfolio. And then there was a delay in approving public funding for those companies that needed cash urgently. We stepped forward and gave a letter to our suppliers confirming our long-term great relationship and that we have had very good credit history with them, and so they included that in their documents to take to the banks, and hopefully it helped somehow to process those things faster. So later on, that obstacle was removed by the German government. Now the government is taking 100% of the risk. But that's just an example how important it is that we have effective and efficient liquidity protection methods and actions from the governments. And at the same time, of course, we all have to do our jobs to make sure that we stay in good shape.
Thanks for that. So from Toyota's point of view, is this something you're monitoring across your suppliers and seeing risks right now?
Yes, definitely. I'd break it down similar to Arnd, that really first and foremost with our suppliers, the importance was to open up safely, to make sure they had the right protocols in place to open up. We've shared a lot of information with our suppliers, and even frankly, some of our suppliers in the North American region have been the benchmark. So that was first and foremost. Second was then the consistent supply. So we can keep both our manufacturing operations as well as our service operations going. But then third is easily the financial situation of our suppliers, their liquidity. Without that, they cannot continue to operate and keep continuous supply. So we have certain levers we can pull on the Toyota side to support our suppliers. But we do see this as one of by far the biggest risks in the next couple weeks and months as it relates to continuous supply.
Thanks very much. So turn to Frank, see if we get again. I think you may have dialed in on the phone now. So if it's worked, I think we still have a delay there, Frank. So I do apologize on that side, Frank. I think we'll pick up some of the inputs and the questions. We do have a number of supplier questions that are relevant for you, and we will follow up with you in a separate bit. We can record something and make sure we get that to our audience. So apologies again for the connection there. That does happen sometimes on this as well. We have a couple more minutes left, and I thought, one of the things I was interested, certainly Arnd was talking about that sort of pace of deliveries, right? An hour delivery to parts of the UK market. Now, I know in Toyota's case, clearly it's somewhat of a different business model, but certainly frequency and delivery is still an important part of your model. And in terms of same-day service elements would have been put in place, drop-offs, things like that. Can you talk a little bit about how those, how those have been developing for Toyota strategically, and also what role they may be playing in the crisis or not right now, given the demand side?
Yeah, we continue to explore, prior to COVID, we want to reduce our order to delivery lead time. We want to be able to take care of customers' vehicles so that we can get them back in their vehicles as quickly as possible. During COVID, we have continued to leverage, those initiatives that have been in play for years now. We have not decreased them. We still, when the messaging especially is about, our job is to keep essential workers going and to keep people in their vehicles, it was, very important to us that we maintain our infrastructure that enables us to take care of those customers as quickly as possible. So the demand did go down, as we talked about. Of course, that impacted some of our same-day delivery service and same-day pickup on dealers, but we did not want to close off those opportunities at all. We haven't expanded those opportunities right now because, frankly, the demand. But coming out as we see the volume increase, we're not just looking to leverage those existing, initiatives that have been in play, but looking to expand them because ultimately we want to get people in their vehicles as quickly as possible.
Absolutely. And another question that has come through from the audience, which is something I raised kind of early on, was in terms of the potential back order situation, does the restart of production and the Toyota move from opening some plants last week to, I believe, opening increasing the ramp up, let's say, in this week and beyond. Does that potentially help the situation for you, or on the service parts, does it potentially cause some internal competition, if you like, in terms of getting parts from suppliers in key areas? Now, actually, you talked earlier about you being in a pretty good situation from the order side, but is that a situation that you're having to manage now in the coming weeks in the restart phase?
Yes, very much. So Toyota did what we called kind of a soft start of our production last week. And this week we're full production, which means we turned on the supply chain. And whenever you turn the supply chain back on after an 8-week break, which we frankly have never done, and nobody in the industry's ever done anything like this, there's bound to be issues. Yeah, we are very concerned about that. Like I said, we got our back order condition, I think, in a pretty good condition. Now we're putting in measures to avoid some spikes in that. A couple of things that we did. First of all, we were proactive to catch up on those back orders like we talked about, and also trying to catch up on delinquent orders as well, not just back orders, delinquent orders. For some suppliers, frankly, that were open, that were able to operate, especially in the areas or regions where they could, we actually worked with them to kind of build banks, because we knew the volume was going to return. And now we have measures really to stay on top of those suppliers. I talked earlier about, you had talked about the One Toyota thing. We have a very close link with our manufacturing side purchasing groups, and we're monitoring both the manufacturing supply chains as well as the service supply chains on a daily basis with them. So we feel like we've got the right measures, hopefully, to control this, but I'd be foolish to think that we're not going to have some back order spikes somewhere.
Yeah. And on from your side, I mean, given that suppliers everywhere will be starting to ramp up or hopefully keep increasing, is that something similarly that you're kind of looking at strategically in terms of the inventory and order management?
Yeah, sure. I think, like I said, we're monitoring the current situation. We've had many suppliers that have shut down their production plants because just the OE volumes were lacking or missing, and then you can't maintain, except for very unusual cases, the infrastructure open and keep the lights on just for a few aftermarket parts in many cases. So that was okay for us. We were protected with safety stock, and also for the longer supply chains adequately. And even we had in a very few cases, but I have to really thank our suppliers that they did a fabulous job in the communication to let us know when they would have to shut down some of their operations or even some of their distribution centers for a while. And then, of course, it's always good when you have that information beforehand, so you can plan ahead. I don't think it's going to change longer term, other than what we had planned to change anyway. So at the moment, as part of our integration process, we're going down substantially in the number of our suppliers. So we're bundling the volumes. We're going from 2,400 suppliers to 700. So that's a big change for all of our teams and also for our suppliers, obviously. And therefore, I believe what's going to happen is that this current situation, as it will accelerate many others, it will also accelerate the consolidation of our supply base.
Good, thank you. So, I mean, and I know we're just about running a bit late on time, so I won't keep you much longer, although I'd like to, selfishly. But clearly, so with that consolidation and that picture, I mean, we also alluded to earlier that Frank alluded to whether there may be shifts in sourcing patterns, more regional localization and stuff like that. I mean, this is early days to it's probably speculation at this point, but I just thought, does any of you have a view on that, or see a reason why you might see it changing or indeed not changing? I mean, Arne, you talk about going from 2,400 to 700. I mean, I don't know what impacts that also might have on the locations and the sort of regions of that, if that's not, that's what role that's playing in that.
I believe if there is not a major disruption, political disruption coming, we believe you can't turn back the clock. We're a global village. We may not be traveling on airplanes as much as we used to, because we found other ways how to speak and even see other people. But for sure, LKQ is a global company. We want to continue to be a global company. It's part of our mission statement, and therefore we don't see us going back to a company that, as much as we work closely with the communities that we have our operations in, we don't see ourselves going back to a company that operates on a village mental base, but on a global base.
Any thoughts on there from you, Ryan or Michael? I mean, again, Toyota in North America certainly has a high regionalization side as well, but is also a very global company, not least the heritage. So, any perspective there?
Well, from a supply side, we're not doing any major consolidations or reductions in our supply base, and even through this crisis, we haven't really had to. We weren't going down that path, and B, it would have been impossible from a timing perspective to make changes with all the other challenges we had facing with all the manufacturing startups. So we're not going down that similar path, but I think mainly because the nature of our businesses is quite different in terms of how we work with our manufacturing side. Now, one thing we are doing, and Arne kind of talked about this, and I think it plays out in our supply chain a little bit, is making sure that the suppliers are being strategic in terms of where they're keeping parts and how they're strategically keeping parts available. So in North America, we have the three countries of Mexico, U.S., and Canada, and the regulations, the rules in Mexico, as you kind of talked about at the beginning, are a little bit different, and then frankly the rules in certain states in the U.S. are similar and different. So some suppliers are being strategic in terms of where they're maintaining some inventory in order to protect it based on certain regulations in certain areas. But I do believe that's kind of a short-term issue as either the regulations are lifted or changes are made there. We don't see that playing out long-term.
Okay, well, I think I've dominated. I've taken quite a lot of your time, but I think for our audience, it's certainly been fantastic and very much worth it. We have quite a global tuning in, and I know everyone will be very appreciative of all the insight that you've shared. Perhaps just a point to leave it on, just a short point. Maybe I ask you to leave it on. We try to end something positive. Is there an area of positive change that you've seen that you definitely you're taking forward with you? So in terms of this crisis, which we hope will be over from certainly the health side as quickly as we can. Don't want to make any light of that. But any even if it's one single thing, we don't need all that. But just maybe if we just leave on that positive note, a positive change to bring out of the crisis. Maybe Arne, I'll start with you.
For me personally, and I believe also for us as a company, the one word that will be remembered out of this crisis is solidarity, because we've seen so much solidarity between the health workers and their patients. We've seen solidarity along our supply chain, and we've seen solidarity among our employees and with our employees. And so that is certainly something that we'll all be remembering once we get out of this.
I would say two things. One is the change is faster, speed. We have had to focus and implement faster than we've ever had to in my 20-year career at Toyota. And it's been awesome, and it's been inspiring to me. And some of the structure we put in place to be able to execute fast, touch points, quick confirmation elements, those types of things, we're going to carry into, you know, in a post-COVID environment, if there is such a thing. The second thing is more of just a reminder, an emphasis about the human element. You know, when people talk about TPS in academia, it's often about you know, reducing waste and lean, et cetera. But central to Toyota is the human being, the person that's impacted and that is driving that change. And you know, we have had to do much in the form of our actions to show our team members how important their safety is. We've also had to communicate and message more than we've ever had to do in the past, because ultimately, if they're not comfortable, then we're going to fail, and we're going to fail our customers. So we have done a tremendous amount of things to ensure that our team members are recognized, and that we're talking to them often, and that they can see how important they are to us, not just by our words, but by our actions. That's not different than what Toyota has operated from, but it was a very strong reminder for me personally as a leader and other leaders that, you know, how powerful that is and how important it is to our future.
Yeah, well said, Michael. You know, for me, and I'll kind of echo a little bit what Arndt said, and obviously echo what Michael said. You know, for me, it goes back to we've all been in this industry for a long time. This is not our first crisis, and you know, anything from the Lehman shock to the you know, great earthquake and tsunami. All the key in all of these crises is it's amazing to me how fast the auto industry, our suppliers, our partners react. And the other thing that kind of bring it back to Toyota is this is yet another reminder, I feel like, that our culture and culture of all companies is extremely important. You know, we live by the guiding principles of, you know, respect for people and continuous improvement. And what's powerful for me is that we continue to practice those, if not greater than, to a greater extent than before, on those principles. And I see that with our supplier partners. I see that with our logistics partners. I'm seeing that everywhere, and that to me is powerful and something I think the auto industry should be proud of.
Absolutely. Well, and those are all very inspiring words from each of you, and I think a great way to end this session. And I want to thank you, you know, Arndt, Ryan, Michael, for your time and input. Frank, thank you so much for sharing that data and insight, and also for your help in connecting, including our connection to Arndt. I do apologize for the connection issue that we had there, but again, we will make sure that we get some of the questions and issues back to hear further from the Klepper side afterwards. So thanks very much to each of our panelists and guests, and we look forward to sharing more with you as this goes on. And Michael, as you put it, but I'm not sure if there's such a thing as post-COVID anyway, but all the changes and things that we're continue to adapt to. Just a short, you know, reminder to our audience, you know, thanks for continuing with us in our Automotive Festival transformation as we continue to cover all the different topics across the value chain. Next week we have our another kind of great session ahead for you, where we're going to be looking at our May monthly update, where we bring you some more insight on some data in terms of market forecasts, and we're also going to be looking at at some of the developments in other industry sectors and how they've been using supply chain strategically, you know, in comparison to automotive and others, and much more to come on that. So please tune in again next week, follow us. Thank you again to our partners, CNW and Fract. And this is a team effort from our side, clearly. So but it depends on your engagement and the audience, and we're always happy to hear from you. So get in touch with us, get in touch with me, give us your feedback. We'll share the slides in an email tomorrow, and it'll be online along with the video. And you know, we'll have more to come with this. So thanks again to all of you. Thanks to our panel. Stay safe out there. I might go and enjoy the sun a little bit whilst I can, and our lockdown rules allow it anyway. So I wish you all the best and look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Christopher. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Ryan.
Thank you, Arndt.
Thank you. Frank.